morning and welcome to another interesting edition of the Economy and Politics Show, where we bring you key developments that occur in the economy as it affects the populace. Value-added tax is a tax payable on the supply of goods and services at different stages of product supply and service delivery value chain. The burden of the tax ultimately falls on the final consumer. VAT, as is known, was introduced in Nigeria via Decree 102 of 1993 under the military dispensation, and implementation started in 1994. It replaced the sales tax introduced via Decree of 1986. The 1999 Constitution does not mention VAT, sales or consumption tax, even though the VAT law predated the 1999 Constitution. And that is why today we'll be discussing the value-added tax and the pathway to fiscal stability in Nigeria. Note why I said fiscal stability. The conversation has been around fiscal federalism, but of course, where there's no tax clarity, it can create fiscal instability, which is not good for a country in the area of attracting investments and achieving inclusive economic growth. So we meet to have this very interesting conversation. It's Mr. Yomi Olugbenro, who is the tax leader for West Africa in Deloitte. Thank you and nice to have you on the show.
Good morning. Good to be here with you.
Yes. And before we begin this interesting conversation, let's give you a wrap-up of what happened across the economic space for last week. Vice President Professor Yomi Osibanjo at the 14th Annual Banking and Finance Conference powered by the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria called on banks to explore ways in which they can provide financing in the area of mass housing and renewable energy. He believed this will have a huge ripple effect in addressing unemployment and lifting millions of Nigerians from poverty. Also at the conference, the Central Bank of Nigeria Governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, in his speech announced the plan to establish the Nigeria International Financial Center, which will connect with leading global financial hubs like New York, London, and Singapore. According to him, it will serve as a platform for mobilizing capital and investments for the Nigerian economy. And also, last week, the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, increased by 17.01% year-on-year in Nigeria for the month of August 2021. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, this recorded a 0.37 percentage points lower than the rate recorded in July 2021, which was 17.38%. Also for the Food Composite Index, according to the NBS report, it rose by 20.30% in August 2021, and this is compared to 21.03% in July 2021. Those are the economic wrap-up for last week. We take a break, and when we return, we go down to this conversation.
The ProShare mobile app, your non-stop access to financial and economic information. With the ProShare app, you can customize your preferred news and videos. You can also get access to latest financial and economic news. Watch videos related to business, economy, financial markets, and lots more. The ProShare app gives you in-depth market stats from the NSE, FMDQ, and NASD. That's not all. You also get real-time alerts. The ProShare mobile app. Information at your pace and in your space.
Welcome back. If you're joining the Economy and Politics Show, the conversation today is around the value-added tax and the pathway to fiscal stability in Nigeria. It has been a major debate on VAT, of course, those of you following the stories on the economic space, what has happened in VAT space. But first, let's begin with you, Mr. Yomi Olugbenro. What is your understanding? We want to get the understanding of VAT and its role in Nigeria's revenue framework. We want to tie this to fiscal policy and how it affects the households, because everything we discuss in the Economy and Politics Show always drills down to how it affects the households.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you started it well in your introduction earlier on. So value-added tax, or what we usually simply refer to as VAT or VAT, is a tax that is charged on consumption of goods and services. Basically there are a number of ways by which taxes could be charged, but maybe you can classify it into two. So there are taxes that are levied directly on individual and company on their income and on their profits. Those ones, you call them direct taxes. So as individuals, we pay personal income taxes on our salaries and earnings. companies pay companies income tax on their profit at the end of the year. Now, those taxes are borne directly by the companies or the individual on whom those taxes are levied. But there are other indirect ways through which companies have to remit taxes to the government, so or government charges taxes. So, and one of it is, VAT and other form of consumption taxes or taxes charged on consumption. They are called indirect because even though companies are the agent of government in charging and collecting those taxes, the ultimate payer, the one that bears the burden of the taxes, are the individual consumer, and that's why they are called indirect. So when you and I goes to the shop, to the mall, or buy different kind of services, there are taxes that are levied on those transactions. Currently it's 7.5%. Prior to all of the squabbles that we're having, was previously 5% for like 2 years ago until we raised it to 7.5%. So every time that you buy consumable goods, you buy clothing, you buy different kind of services, VAT is charged at the rate of 7.5%, and you pay it over to the company or to the vendor, and then that vendor, as the agent of the government, on. So that's why it's called indirect. Now, it's called value added because it is charged at different levels of the chain of production. And the way it usually works, the mechanism that through which it works, is that when companies are buying their inputs and raw materials, so they incur some VAT they pay. So that constitutes a cost to them, what we call input VAT. When they are in turn selling those goods and services to consumer, they then charge VAT and collect on behalf of the government. That's what we call the output VAT. So so those companies or agents or merchants just essentially at the end of each month set off the amount they have incurred, at least the eligible portion of it, the amount they have incurred when buying their goods and services, and they set it off against what they have charged when selling their goods, and they pay it over to the government. Because of the indirect nature, it's one of the most effective ways by which the government can make money through taxes. No matter how much we try to strengthen the system of compliance for direct taxes, it will still be a tough challenge getting nearly 60 million, 70 million, or 80 million, depending on what the actual statistics says, of those who are engaged in productive employment to line up in front of their revenue services and pay taxes. But indirect taxes, the government doesn't necessarily need to know you as the ultimate consumer and payer of those taxes. All that the government needs to know are the vendors. So you buy your airtime, government doesn't know you, but government only needs to deal with the few telco operators, and they collect VAT on your transaction. You go to the mall, 1 million of us rush into malls to buy. Government doesn't need to know us per se individually. All that the government needs to focus on is just the merchant and the vendors that are selling those services to us. So it's a lot more administratively convenient to administer. It's a lot cheaper in terms of cost of administration, and it's a lot difficult to evade. And that's why it's becoming increasingly the most significant line item. In fact, in 2020, there is no other source of tax revenue that got as much as VAT. VAT got even more than petroleum profit tax in 2020. So that's exactly what VAT is. That's why it's a topical issue, because it's now the new gold when we talk about taxation.
Yeah, it's a topical issue. It's now the new gold. Like you just said, last year, according to the NBS, National Bureau of Statistics, we had 1.53 trillion collected for that year, and that was massive.
So, absolutely. And in comparison to that, the PPT was 1.17. Yeah. So it's slightly, PPT is slightly below what VAT got. Yeah. When you add both the customs and the non-custom VAT. Yeah,
definitely. And of course, when you look at the allocation structure, if I'm right, which is 15% federal government, states is 50%, 35% local government, brings us to the next, of course, the major debate and conversation in the country now, which was when Rivers State took its case for VAT collection to the courts. And of course, it got its initial ruling in its favor in the High Court, which was affirmed It was affirmed initially by the courts, got to the Federal High Court, got its affirmation, and now we have the return to status quo ruling of the Court of Appeal. But of course, Rivers State has taken its case to the Supreme Court, so that's where everybody is watching now, Mr. Yomi, and I know also as a tax expert, you're also watching for what will be the outcome of that case. But apart from that, Lagos and Ogun State, who are also major states where we derive VAT, have also made their own intentions in terms of Lagos has signed its VAT bill. Ogun is in that process, and definitely we're going to see the signal from what happens in the Supreme Court. This again alludes to the fact that VAT is the new goal, and of course, this is a major concern. What's your take from your expertise?
Well, I mean, I think the fact that it's the new goal, you know, it's probably why it's raising all of the concern. And you started out the question, you know, by actually pointing out why the agitation started in the first place. So in every federating structure, you're always going to have conversation around whether the basis of allocation is fair and equitable. So the federal government alone as an entity get 15%, and all of the, you know, the states, you know, get 50%, there will be question asked as to, you know, if this is fair and equitable and enough to allow states defray the cost of governance. Local government get 35. So I think the conversation for what should be a fair basis for allocation shows should federal government get 15, should it get less? Should state get more, should they get less? You know, it's part of the conversation. But as you know, the sharing formula are actually two pronged. So there is the allocation that, you know, that we use for states, local, and the federal government, which is the one you had mentioned. Now, but the 50% that goes to the state or the 35% that goes to the local government also needs to be allocated or apportioned amongst them. And that actually is the one that is causing a lot more, you know, agitation, because when all of the 50% for CAT state is put together, the portion that is shared based on derivation is 20%. You know, so each of the state get 20% of that, depending on the weight of how much was collected in their state. 50% is shared based on equality, and 30% on population. And so many states will ask you, this is not fair. The quantum of the economic activity that is happening within my state will determine how much I need to spend on infrastructure. It will determine how much I need to spend on security. It will determine how much I need to, you know, spend on health and a whole lot of things. So if 80% of, you know, the amount that we're supposed to share doesn't have any bearing to the economic activity, I don't think that is fair. And that conversation has been on, and it doesn't look like, you know, a solution was coming, and that was why states start digging up the constitution and start challenging the constitutionality of the federal VAT law itself, and whether it is the federal government that should collect. And somehow they found the loophole within the law, because quite clearly speaking, if you check the constitution and you look at, you know, the exclusive legislative list where the federal government ideally should have derived its power for National Assembly to legislate, VAT was missing, either by omission or commission, all right? And so if it's not on the exclusive list, and it's not on the concurrent list where both of us can legislate, then it falls on where the state can exercise, because that's on the residual list. So they took their case to court, Rivers State, and the court said, yes, the federal government or FRS should ideally not be the one collecting VAT. In fact, if you read the judgment quite well, because I think the one for VAT has been the one generating a lot of controversy, the judgment was actually a lot more profound, because it says federal government should not collect VAT. It also should not collect, or FRS should not collect withholding tax. It shouldn't collect education levy, and it shouldn't collect technology levy, education tax and technology levy. So the only reason why VAT has, you know, been discussed quite a lot is because Rivers State then, on the strength of that judgment, then went on to do to promulgate its own VAT law. They haven't done that to any of the other law, and that's why it seems that attention has been on the VAT law. So, like you said, the case is in the court. There's a substantive appeal by the FIRS at the Court of Appeal, which hasn't been heard. There was an application for stay of execution of the judgment, which hasn't actually been heard. I think from the last we heard, it was meant to be heard today. But what the Court of Appeal did in the interim was that when Lagos State filed to be joined to the suit, because Lagos State said, look, the original court case, I wasn't a party to it, therefore I'm not bound by the, by the judgment. So I'm an interested party here. I want to be joined. So when Lagos State filed that, the Court of Appeal then issued like some kind of an interim order to say, look, the status quo pre-dispute should be maintained pending when the application for stay is heard. If nothing changes, we expect that application for stay to be heard today. So we are all, putting our ears on the ground to know what will be the direction. Obviously, we heard also that the Rivers State has gone to the Supreme Court, to the Apex Court. So we're hoping that we can at least have clarity that the court can help us with expeditious hearing, because uncertainty, confusion is not good when it comes to tax system. So and you know that when it comes to law, you can sit two senior advocates of Nigeria on this call, and both sides will argue convincingly for both sides. I've had argument heard that status quos mean, Rivers State law should continue, and it was only the judgment of the initial judgment that that status quo applied to. Some have said no. The express wording is status quo pre-dispute. So meaning that it should be the FRS that should, continue to do what it was doing prior to the judgment. So, but we don't want that confusion. Taxpayer don't want confusion. Right. We don't want to be in the mix. So we will. It really will be good for business, for the courts to adjudicate quite expeditiously.
Okay, in just 1 minute, if that ruling favors Rivers State, which other states takes as a precedent, some experts have raised concerns about states' capacity in terms of collecting the VAT and the implications it has even for the Finance Act, where businesses with about 25 million turnover exempted from tax and all that. It could definitely have an effect on tax administration. Do states have that capacity at this point? What would you advise in that regard if that favors Rivers and other states?
Okay, so we'll try to avoid being preemptive of what the court will say, but the conversation we're having is just generally on the substance of tax administration itself. If we judge by how effective many state and revenue services have been with the taxes that they have been administering over the years, you don't need any expert to tell you that where they are at the moment, there's a lot of inefficiency within the system, and it's going to be their capacity to administer the tax and get the added revenue that they are clamoring for. It's doubtful. So I have my worries, I have my concerns that if states indeed are to administer this VAT, they will need to do a whole lot of waking up and revamping their system, leveraging technology and making sure that they actually take this as critical and serious to be able to even get anywhere close to where they were, what they were getting before. And state also needs to recognize that when this happens, it becomes a fully decentralized system, and each state will only be, entitled to collect taxes that are transactions that are consummated or consumed, services consumed within their respective state. Currently, because of decentralization, the data looks totally different. So you may assume that a state is doing much more than it's doing just because it has the benefit of situating the head office, of the company. Now, but beyond the challenges for the tax authorities, for me, I even think the major challenge that we will have, or the additional challenge we will have, if this becomes fully decentralized, is one of the issues that you had mentioned, the impact on doing business, the impact on micro and small businesses, because the two laws that we have seen passed by state, both Rivers and Lagos State, doesn't have provision for exemption for micro and small businesses that the federal law have. And the reason is simple. The exemption was not in the original VAT Act. The exemption came in via the Finance Act, which is a federal act, which was centrally passed, and it was referencing the federal VAT law that is now been declared null and void. All right. So all the version of the law that the state made was essentially a mirror of the old VAT law itself without the provision for the MSME. So it will mean that micro and small businesses that have been having some style of relief from the challenges and the pressure of filing VAT returns are now caught back in the web. Taxpayers are also now going to be dealing with the complexity of dealing with 37 state internal, different revenue authorities across the state and federal capital territory. That will increase cost of compliance. That will worsen our ease of paying taxes and ease of doing businesses. And we are likely going to start having, interstate trade dispute over who is entitled to collect. Are you going to grant me input VAT deduction for the taxes I incurred in your state, and all of that. And a lot of businesses will now need to put up structure to ensure that they can do proper reconciliation, they can attend to tax authorities when they come for audit and examinations and all of that. So if you look at it from that side, beyond the constitutionality or the lack of it, we need to look at the broader impact for business. My own position, which I've canvassed quite clearly, is that beyond the legal position, I do not think that a decentralized VAT system is good for our system. It's not good for business because of the cost of doing business, because of the potential trade dispute. It's also not potentially advantageous to state in the short term because it's not going to come easy for them to be able to match the structure that FRS has already put in place for nearly 3 decades of running this. And so maybe our attention should be focused on fixing maybe the constitution for starters, if that is what is creating the legal logjam that we have. And then 2, we focus on balancing the apportionment or the sharing formula so that it's a lot fairer and that more states can feel the sense of getting more for the business activity happening in their states.
Yeah, very clear statement. You're also aware that the states wrote to federal government in terms of stamp duties. Do you want to speak to that in like 30 seconds? We know that the Finance Act, you've also been actively involved in discussing around how it has enabled the business environment. What are the implications too? Because the Attorney General has also written back to 36 states in terms of that space too.
Yeah, so for me, I think for as long as we do have laws and we don't allow rules to be very clear, we're going to continue to have this kind of disputes. Now, typically, right, when transactions are consummated between individuals, the stamp duty that is charged on those transactions legally falls within the jurisdiction of the states. Now, it's only when party to the transactions is a corporate entity, that's when the FRS or the federal comes into play. Now, but we know that just like VAT, the administration or the collection of stamp duty has been largely driven by FIRS, right? So because the banks and and other organizations essentially just file their returns through the FIRS. So we need to have all of this clear. We can, if the law says individuals pay their stamp duty and states are supposed to be the beneficiaries of those stamp duty, we should let the law work as clearly as is intended. And so it's part of the reason why you will continue to have agitations and you continue to have states making parallel laws, and all of that. That was why Lagos State went into consumption tax and hotel and occupancy tax when they were having issues with the federal government initially, because every state is looking for, how to generate more revenue. Indirect taxes is the new way. If you add stamp duty, I think last year we made about 120 billion from stamp duty, and it's just scratching the surface. If you add stamp duty and VAT together, which is like the 2 major indirect taxes we have, it made well over 33.1% of the total taxes, including petroleum profit tax, if you add it together. So those are the ways by which states can legitimately generate revenue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olugbenro. It's very clear. Like I said, I choose that theme for today's conversation. VAT and the pathway to fiscal stability. We can't have fiscal stability if there are multiple taxation processes, and decentralized VAT system like you've advocated will not really help a pro-business environment. So definitely there's need for an enlightened consensus. There's a need for a constitutional understanding that addresses all these concerns, and of course, the legal process needs to enable clarity. And we hope that this will play out so that the new goal, which is VAT, will continue to play its space in driving Nigeria's fiscal stability. Thank you once again, Mr. Yomi Olugbenro, Tax Leader West Africa, Deloitte, for not disappointing your very elaborate but insightful contribution on this conversation around value-added tax and the state of the nation. Thank you once again for the time.
Thank you very much for having me. My pleasure.
Yes. And that'll be all for the Economy and Politics show today. And this conversation around the value-added tax is a big one, and we have them all captured in ProShare. Log on to www.proshare.com and click on value-added tax on our search bar. You'll get all the latest stories, articles, and reports around value-added tax, the rulings, judgments, and all that around states involved, and to get yourself more enlightened about the VAT issue and how it concerns our fiscal stability as a nation. If you have comments, views, or questions around our conversation today, please send them to otobasi.otabasekong@proshare.com. We'll be glad to respond to you based on whatever you're sending, is comments, questions, or, of course, suggestions. Don't forget to follow our social media platforms displayed on the screen. And in this period, we advise you to continue to stay safe. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching and have a nice day.